The sun rose slowly over the Italian peninsula, spilling a warm golden light across the rolling hills and the gentle current of the Tiber River. It was the kind of dawn that seemed eternal, untouched by the hands of time, yet it marked the beginning of a story that would echo for millennia. Birds stirred in the fig trees, and the air was filled with the scent of damp earth and wild herbs. In this quiet world, long before marble temples, roaring amphitheaters, and the marching of legions, there existed only a scattering of shepherds' huts, herds grazing in the valleys, and the unyielding heartbeat of the land. This was the cradle of Rome. The origins of the eternal city are wrapped not in dry records but in the fabric of legend. Every Roman child would grow up knowing the story. Every statesman would invoke it to inspire loyalty, and every poet would recite it as if the gods themselves had whispered it to mankind. At the heart of this myth were two brothers, Romulus and Remus, whose lives were marked from birth by divine intervention, mortal treachery, and the cruel yet irresistible pull of destiny. Their mother, Rhea Silvia, was no ordinary woman. She was the daughter of Numitor, rightful king of Alba Longa, a city founded generations earlier by the Trojan prince Aeneas's descendants. Alba Longa was the proud heir to Trojan resilience, and Numitor ruled it with fairness. But his brother, Amulius, driven by envy and hunger for power, staged a coup. Seizing the throne, Amulius sought to eliminate every possible threat to his reign. He forced Rhea Silvia to become a Vestal virgin, a priestess sworn to celibacy, ensuring she could bear no heirs who might challenge him. Yet fate, it seemed, had its own plans. According to the legend, the god Mars, the fierce and relentless deity of war, visited Rhea Silvia and fathered twin sons. When the infants were born, their cries carried the promise of both greatness and danger. Amulius, fearing prophecy and the wrath of Mars, ordered the unthinkable. The twins were to be killed. A pair of servants was tasked with carrying the newborns to the Tiber River and casting them into its depths. But rivers are strange keepers of secrets. On that day, the Tiber had flooded its banks, and the servants, unable to reach deep waters, left the basket in the shallows. The current took it, cradling the twins like a mother's arms, and carried them downstream until it came to rest beneath the shade of a wild fig tree at the base of the Palatine Hill. It was there, in that liminal space between life and death, that the she-wolf appeared. To Romans, the wolf was both feared and revered symbol of the wilderness, a creature of strength and cunning. Drawn by the sound of the infant's cries, the animal approached. Instead of seeing prey, she saw helplessness. Lowering herself, she offered her milk, her body warm against the chill morning air. For days, perhaps weeks, she guarded them, until a shepherd named Faustulus stumbled upon the extraordinary scene. Faustulus, awestruck by the sight, knew that this was no ordinary happenstance. He carried the twins home to his wife, Acca Laurentia, and together they raised the boys as their own. Under their care, Romulus and Remus grew tall and strong, their eyes bright with curiosity, their limbs quick from running in the hills, and their voices commanding among the other shepherd youths. The bond between the brothers was unshakable, their loyalty to one another forged in the hardship of their mysterious beginnings. As they came of age, their leadership and courage drew attention. When rival shepherds clashed, it was often Romulus and Remus who led the defense of their people. Their feats in hunting and in protecting their flocks became tales told by the fireside, but destiny silent until now would soon reveal itself. In the course of a skirmish with the herdsmen of King Amulius, Remus was captured and taken to Alba Longa. There, his noble bearing and fearless demeanor caught the attention of Numitor, now an old man. As the king questioned him, pieces of a forgotten past began to align. The age of the young man, the timing of his birth, the rumors of Rhea Silvia's twins lost to the river. Numitor's heart stirred with hope. When Romulus, learning of his brother's capture, came to rescue him, the truth could no longer be denied. They were the grandsons of Numitor, rightful heirs to Alba Longa's legacy. What followed was swift and decisive. The brothers rallied loyal men from the countryside, stormed the city, and struck down Amulius. Numitor was restored to his throne, and Alba Longa rejoiced in the return of justice. Yet for Romulus and Remus, the victory was only a chapter, not the ending. The brothers, restless and ambitious, desired a realm of their own, something that would not merely restore the past but forge a new destiny. They returned to the banks of the Tiber, to the very place where the she-wolf had nursed them. It was there they envisioned building a city. But vision, as often happens, bred rivalry. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill. Remus preferred the Aventine. They sought the god's will through augury, watching the flight of birds for omens, but when the signs conflicted, tempers flared, words turned to insults, and insults to violence. In a moment both tragic and symbolic, Romulus struck down Remus. Whether it was in the heat of passion or as an assertion of authority, the deed was done. The bond of brotherhood was severed forever. Romulus, alone now, pressed forward with the founding. He marked the boundaries of his city with a plough, a sacred ritual signifying divine blessing. The walls rose, huts multiplied, and from neighboring regions came settlers, refugees, wanderers, outcasts. Rome was born not as a city of pure lineage, but as a gathering of the ambitious, the desperate, and the bold. On the 21st of April, 753 BCE, Romulus became the first king of Rome, and the myth became the foundation of Roman identity. In the years to come, Rome would grow beyond anyone's imagining. Its soldiers would march to the ends of the known world. Its laws would shape civilizations, and its language would give birth to the tongues of future nations. But at its heart, Romans would always remember this story: how two brothers, a she-wolf and the favor of fate, gave birth to the eternal city. To them, the tale was not mere legend. It was a reminder that greatness is forged in adversity, that the gods watch over the bold, and that from the humblest of beginnings can rise an empire without equal. When Romulus declared himself the first king of Rome, the city was little more than a fortified village perched upon the Palatine Hill. Its walls were modest, its houses simple huts of wood and thatch. Yet in Romulus' eyes and in the eyes of the gods it was the seed of something far greater. Rome, in its infancy, needed structure, protection, and above all, people. For a king who had just founded a city, the greatest challenge was not defending it from enemies, but filling it with citizens. Romulus opened Rome's gates to the outcasts of neighboring lands, fugitives, exiles, and wanderers seeking a new start. This open-door policy brought an influx of men, strong and eager for opportunity, but created a problem: few women. Without families, the city could not endure beyond its first generation. Romulus, with a mix of cunning and ruthlessness, devised a plan that would enter Roman legend as one of its most controversial episodes: the rape of the Sabine women. He invited the neighboring Sabines to a grand festival, offering games, feasts, and entertainment. As the festivities reached their height, the Roman men seized the Sabine women, taking them as wives. Outrage swept through the Sabine villages, and war seemed inevitable. Yet when the Sabine armies came to reclaim their daughters, the women themselves intervened, now bound to their Roman husbands, many having borne children. They pleaded for peace, unwilling to see their fathers and brothers kill their husbands and sons. This unlikely act of reconciliation forged an alliance between the Romans and Sabines, strengthening the young city. Romulus ruled for 37 years, shaping Rome's first institutions: the Senate, composed of 100 elders called paters, the Comitia Curiata, an assembly of citizens, and the division of the population into tribes for administrative and military purposes. His reign established the martial spirit and political structures that would define Rome for centuries. But even legends must end. Romulus's death was as mysterious as his birth. Some said he was taken up into the heavens by the gods, becoming the deity, Quirinus. Others whispered he was torn apart by jealous senators. Either way, the founder was gone, and Rome stood at the threshold of a new chapter. The kings who followed each left their mark, shaping the city's character and destiny. Numa Pompilius, the lawgiver. If Romulus embodied war and conquest, Numa Pompilius, the second king, represented peace and order. A Sabine by birth, Numa was reluctant to take the throne, preferring a quiet life devoted to religion and philosophy. Yet the people insisted, and Numa accepted, bringing with him a vision of a Rome bound together not by constant warfare, but by law, faith, and tradition. Numa established many of Rome's most enduring religious institutions: the office of Pontifex Maximus, chief priest, the Vestal Virgins, sacred duties, and the division of the year into 12 months with sacred festivals. He built temples to Janus and Vesta, weaving the gods into the daily life of the people. Under his 43-year reign, Rome knew peace, a rare respite in its long history. Tullus Hostilius, the warrior king, the third king, Tullus Hostilius, swung the pendulum back toward war. A man of ambition and aggression, Tullus sought to expand Rome's territory by subduing its neighbors. His most famous conflict was with Alba Longa, the city of Rome's founders. To avoid a full-scale war, the two cities agreed to decide the conflict through a duel between three Roman brothers, the Horatian three Alban brothers, the Curati. The contest was brutal and dramatic. Two of the Horatii fell quickly, leaving the third alone against three wounded Curati. Using cunning, the last Horatius feigned retreat, drawing his slower, injured opponents apart and killing them one by one. Rome claimed victory, and Alba Longa became its vassal. Yet Tullus's reign ended ominously. Legends say he neglected the gods, and when he attempted to perform sacred rites incorrectly, Jupiter struck him down with a bolt of lightning. Ancus Marcius, the builder, the fourth king, Ancus Marcius, was the grandson of Numa Pompilius, and he sought to balance war and peace. He expanded Rome's territory, subdued the Latins, and brought their people into the city, continuing Romulus's policy of integrating outsiders. Ancus is credited with founding Rome's first prison, extending the city to the Janiculum Hill, and most importantly, building the first bridge across the Tiber, the Pons Sublicious. This bridge connected Rome to trade routes and military paths, laying the groundwork for its future expansion. Lucius Tarquinius, Priscus the visionary with the fifth king, Rome saw the influence of foreign ambition. Tarquinius Priscus, of Etruscan origin, came to Rome seeking fortune and rose to power through wit and charm. As king, he doubled the size of the Senate, began draining the marshlands between the hills to create the Roman Forum, and initiated the construction of the great sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima that still exists today. He also started work on the Circus Maximus, Rome's first and largest chariot racing stadium. His reign was cut short by assassination, a reminder that even kings in Rome walked a dangerous path. Servius Tullius, the reformer. Servius Tullius, the sixth king, rose from humble beginnings. Some say he was the son of a slave to become one of Rome's most transformative rulers. He reorganized the city's population into classes based on wealth, creating the Comitia Sephoriata, a new assembly that gave the wealthy greater influence in military and political matters. He fortified the city with the Servian Wall, expanding Rome beyond the original hills. Under his rule, Rome grew both in size and sophistication. Tarquinius Superbus, the tyrant, the seventh and final king. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, earned his place in history as a symbol of arrogance and tyranny. He seized the throne through violence, ruled without the Senate's counsel, and used fear to maintain power. His downfall came through an act that shocked even a city accustomed to bloodshed: the violation of the noblewoman Lucretia by his son. Lucretia's suicide ignited a revolt, led by Lucius Junius Brutus. The people, outraged, drove Tarquin and his family into exile in 509 BCE. With his expulsion, the monarchy ended, and Rome became a republic. The res publica, the public affair, would go on to become the most famous political experiment of the ancient world. But the memory of the kings, with their mix of vision, ambition, and cruelty, would linger in Roman consciousness for centuries. In just over 2.5 centuries, Rome had transformed from a small settlement into a powerful city-state, its foundations laid in blood, faith, and ambition. The Age of Kings had given it walls, temples, laws, and legends, but the next era would demand something greater: a republic capable of ruling not just a city, but an empire. The year 509 BCE marked a turning point unlike any in Rome's short history. The city had cast out its last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, and in his place established a new system, a republic where power would be shared, at least in theory, among the people. But the birth of this new order was anything but secure. The monarchy's fall had left behind enemies both within and without, and the young republic faced a trial by fire that would determine whether it would flourish or be swept into oblivion. The birth of the republic: in the place of one king, Rome now had 2 consuls, elected annually, each holding equal power and capable of vetoing the other. This system was designed to prevent any single man from seizing unchecked authority again. The Senate, composed of Rome's elder statesmen, advised the consuls, while assemblies of citizens voted on laws and elections. It was a fragile balance, and in its earliest years, the republic was constantly threatened by the ambition of powerful men and the pressures of survival. Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who had led the revolt against Tarquin, became one of the first consuls. His dedication to the republic was absolute, even When faced with tragedy, when his own sons were caught conspiring to restore the monarchy, Brutus ordered their execution. The image of the consul watching the lash fall upon his children became a defining symbol of Roman virtue. The needs of the state above the bonds of blood. War with the exiled King Tarquinius Superbus did not accept exile quietly. From his refuge among the Etruscans, he sought allies to retake Rome. His first attempt came at the Battle of Silva Arsia, where Rome defeated the Etruscan forces, but lost Brutus in the fighting. Tarquin then turned to Lars Porsena, the powerful king of Clusium, who laid siege to Rome. Legend says that during this siege, a young Roman hero, Gaius Mucius Later, known as Scaevola left-handed, attempted to assassinate Porsena, but killed the wrong man. Captured and brought before the king, Mucius thrust his right hand into a brazier without flinching, showing such courage that Porsena released him and made peace with Rome. The patricians and plebeians, while foreign threats pressed from outside. A different conflict simmered within. Rome's society was sharply divided between the patricians, wealthy aristocratic families who held political power, and the plebeians, the common citizens who worked the fields, served in the army, but had little say in government. Patricians dominated the Senate and the consulship, leaving plebeians resentful and marginalized. This inequality sparked the conflict of the orders, a long struggle for political rights. In 494 BCE, facing both war and domestic unrest, the plebeians staged a remarkable act of protest. They abandoned the city en masse and camped on a nearby hill, refusing to fight or work until their grievances were addressed. This first secession forced the patricians to concede to the creation of the tribune of the plebs, officials with the power to veto laws harmful to the common people. It was the first step toward a more balanced political system, though tensions would persist for centuries. Rome's early wars. In its first century, the Republic was surrounded by hostile neighbors, the Etruscans to the north, the Sabines and Volscians to the east, and the Latins, once allies, now wary rivals. Rome fought a near-constant series of small wars, each one testing its resilience. One of the most famous of these early struggles was against the Volscians, led by the legendary Gaius Marcius Coriolanus. Once a Roman hero, Coriolanus fell out of favor after a political dispute and was exiled. In his bitterness, he joined the Volscians and marched against his own city. Rome seemed doomed until Coriolanus's mother, Vituria, and wife Volumnia met him outside the gates. Their pleas moved him to withdraw, sparing Rome, but sealing his fate among the Volscians. The 12 Tables. As Rome expanded, so too did the complexity of its laws. In the mid-5th century BCE, the plebeians demanded that the laws be written down, so that justice could not be manipulated by patrician judges. The result was the law of the 12 Tables, inscribed on bronze tablets and displayed publicly in the Forum. These laws, though harsh by modern standards, became the foundation of Roman legal tradition, enshrining principles like the right to a trial and protection from arbitrary punishment. The Gallic sack of Rome 390 BCE, Rome's early struggles, culminated in one of the most traumatic events in its history. In 390 BCE, a tribe of Gauls under the chieftain Brennus swept down from the north, defeating the Romans at the Battle of the Allia. The surviving Romans fled, and the Gauls entered the city, sacking and burning much of it. Only the fortified Capitoline Hill held out. Legends from this siege became part of Roman folklore. One tells of Marcus Manlius Capitolinus, who was alerted to a night assault by the sacred geese of Juno, whose cries awakened the defenders. After months of siege, the Romans agreed to pay the Gauls a ransom in gold. When the Romans protested that the Gauls were using heavier weights, Brennus threw his sword on the scales and uttered the chilling words, "Vi victis," woe to the vanquished. The Gallic sack left deep scars. Rome had been humbled, its walls charred, its pride wounded. But from this disaster came resolve. The city rebuilt, stronger than before, with new fortifications and a renewed determination never to suffer such humiliation again. A republic forged in fire by 390 BCE, the Roman Republic had survived a century of wars, class struggle, and near destruction. It had learned harsh lessons, that unity between classes was essential in crisis, that written law was a shield against tyranny, and that military readiness was the price of survival. The Rome that emerged from these trials was no longer a fragile experiment. It was a city hardened by adversity, driven by ambition, and destined for expansion. In the century to come, Rome would no longer fight merely for survival. It would turn outward, seeking dominance over the Italian peninsula, and in doing so, it would lay the foundations for an empire. The smoke of the Gallic sack still lingered in Rome's memory long after the ashes had cooled. The city that had been humbled in 390 BCE was not the same city that rose from the ruins. It had rebuilt its walls higher and stronger, fortified its spirit, and sharpened its weapons. The Romans learned the lesson the Gauls had taught with fire. Survival was not enough when dominance could guarantee safety. Over the next century, Rome would turn its gaze outward, fighting war after war until it stood as the undisputed master of the Italian peninsula. Rebuilding and retaliation. The first task was securing Rome's immediate borders. After the Gallic invasion, many neighboring peoples Volsci, Acri Etruscans believed Rome was weakened and ripe for conquest. They were mistaken. The Romans struck back with a mix of relentless campaigning and strategic alliances. The Latin League, once an alliance of equals, was brought under tighter Roman control after the Latin War, 340–338 BCE. Rome dissolved the League, granting some cities Roman citizenship while leaving others as semi-autonomous allies bound to Rome by treaty. This divide-and-rule policy would become a cornerstone of Roman expansion. The Samnite Wars. The greatest challenge to Roman supremacy in central Italy came from the Samnites, a fierce and warlike people who inhabited the rugged mountains of the south. The struggle between Rome and Samnium unfolded in three brutal conflicts: the Samnite Wars, spanning nearly half a century. First Samnite War, 343–341 BCE. The war began over control of Campania, a fertile and wealthy region. The Romans, invited to aid the city of Capua against Samnite aggression, clashed with their mountain rivals. Though Rome achieved initial victories, the conflict ended in a negotiated peace, as both sides faced other pressing threats. Second Samnite War, 326–304 BCE. This was the most intense and costly of the three wars. It included one of Rome's most humiliating defeats, the Battle of the Caudine Forks, 321 BCE. The Romans, trapped in a narrow mountain pass by the Samnites, were forced to surrender without a fight. In an act meant to degrade them, the Samnites made the Roman soldiers pass under a yoke of spears, a symbol of submission. This humiliation burned in the Roman mind for generations, fueling a relentless campaign that eventually broke Samnite resistance. Third, Samnite War, 298–290 BCE. By the Third War, the Samnites had formed a coalition with the Etruscans, Umbrians, and Gauls to resist Roman expansion. The decisive Battle of Sentinum, 295 BCE, saw the Roman legions face a massive enemy force. According to legend, the Roman consul Publius Decius Mus sacrificed himself in a ritual devotio, charging into the enemy ranks to inspire his troops. The victory shattered the coalition and cemented Rome's dominance in central Italy. Rome's military machine. The Samnite Wars were more than a test of endurance. They were a laboratory for Roman military innovation. The rigid phalanx formation inherited from the Greeks proved ill-suited to Italy's mountainous terrain. In its place, the Romans developed the Manipular Legion, a flexible formation that could adapt to varied landscapes. Organized into small units, maniples, the legion became the most effective fighting force in the ancient world, capable of responding swiftly to changing battlefield conditions. War with the Etruscans. While Rome fought in the south, it also pushed northward against the Etruscans. Once rulers of much of central Italy, the Etruscan cities were now in decline, weakened by internal rivalries. Rome defeated them piecemeal, annexing territory and integrating their people into the Republic. By the early 3rd century BCE, Etruria was firmly under Roman influence. The Pyrrhic War, 280–75 BCE. Rome's expansion inevitably brought it into contact and conflict with the Greek colonies of southern Italy, particularly the wealthy city of Tarentum. Fearing Roman domination, Tarentum appealed to Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, and a brilliant general of the Hellenistic world. Pyrrhus arrived with a formidable army, including war elephants, creatures the Romans had never faced before. The first encounters, such as the Battle of Heraclea, 280 BCE, and the Battle of Asculum, 279 BCE, ended in Roman defeats. Yet Pyrrhus's victories were costly. After Asculum, he is said to have remarked, "Another such victory, and I am undone." This gave birth to the phrase Pyrrhic victory, a win so costly it amounts to defeat. Eventually, Rome adapted to the challenge, neutralizing the elephants and wearing down Pyrrhus's forces. The decisive Battle of Beneventum, 275 BCE, ended his campaign, and he withdrew from Italy, leaving Rome free to dominate the Greek cities. Rome's Italian alliance system. By 264 BCE, Rome had completed its conquest of the peninsula, but rather than ruling through direct occupation alone, Rome perfected a system of alliances. Some cities received full Roman citizenship, others partial rights, and many remained autonomous allies bound to provide troops for Rome's wars. This network created a vast pool of manpower, ensuring that Rome could field massive armies year after year. The conquered peoples were not treated as mere subjects, they were tied to Rome's fortunes. Victory in war brought spoils that were shared, roads that connected allies to the capital, and protection under Rome's military umbrella. This pragmatic approach transformed former enemies into indispensable partners, laying the foundation for Rome's future empire. A peninsula united, but at what cost? The unification of Italy under Roman leadership was a staggering achievement, but it came at a price. Generations had known nothing but war. Entire regions bore the scars of conquest. Yet the rewards were undeniable. Rome now commanded the resources, manpower, and strategic position to project its power far beyond the peninsula. On the horizon lay a new and far greater challenger maritime empire across the sea. Rich, powerful, and determined to check Rome's rise, the collision between these two powers would ignite the most famous rivalry of antiquity, Rome versus Carthage. By 264 BCE, Rome stood as the undisputed master of the Italian peninsula. Its legions had crushed the Samnites, tamed the Etruscans, humbled the Greeks, and bound the cities of Italy into a vast network of alliances. But across the sea, another power watched with wary eyes: Carthage, mistress of the western Mediterranean. Carthage was everything Rome was not: a maritime empire, wealthy from trade, with colonies and naval bases stretching from North Africa to Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and western Sicily, founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers from Tyre. It was a city of merchants and sailors, ruled by an oligarchy of powerful families. Its navy was unrivaled, its harbors bustling with ships laden with silver, grain, ivory, and exotic goods from across the known world. If Rome dominated the land, Carthage commanded the sea. The spark in Sicily, the inevitable clash began, as so many wars do. In a small and seemingly insignificant corner of the map, the city of Messana, in northeastern Sicily. Sicily was a land of rich farmland and strategic harbors, coveted by both Rome and Carthage. Messana had been seized by a band of Italian mercenaries known as the Mamertines, who, threatened by the forces of Syracuse, appealed first to Carthage and then to Rome for protection. Carthaginian troops arrived first, but when the Mamertines invited Rome to intervene, the Senate hesitated. Sicily lay beyond Italy, and the Republic had never committed its armies to such a distant venture. Yet the lure of opportunity and the fear of letting Carthage tighten its grip on the island proved too strong. The decision was made. Rome would cross the sea. In 264 BCE, Roman legions landed in Sicily for the first time in history. A land power goes to sea at the outset of the war. The two powers were mismatched in their strengths. On land, Rome's legions were without peer. At sea, Carthage's warships ruled the waves. For Rome to win in Sicily, it needed to challenge Carthage's naval supremacy, a daunting prospect for a people with little seafaring tradition. Legend claims the Romans captured a stranded Carthaginian, Quinquerema, massive warship with 5 banks of oars, and used it as a model to build their own fleet. Within months, shipyards along the Tiber churned out over 100 vessels. But Rome added an innovation: the corvus, or crow, a boarding bridge with a spike that could be dropped onto an enemy ship, locking the two vessels together. Once the ships were bound, naval combat became, in essence, a land battle. Rome's specialty. Early clashes, the first major test of this new strategy, came at the Battle of Mylae 260 BCE. Under the command of Gaius Duilius, the Roman fleet met the Carthaginians at sea. As the enemy ships closed in, the corvée slammed down, and legionaries stormed across the bridges, overwhelming the Carthaginian crews. The victory stunned the Mediterranean world. Rome, a newcomer to the sea, had struck a blow against the greatest naval power of the age. Over the next decade, the war raged across Sicily and the surrounding waters. Roman legions fought grueling campaigns to seize Carthaginian strongholds, while fleets clashed in the Tyrrhenian and Mediterranean seas. Rome suffered catastrophic losses to storms, with hundreds of ships wrecked and tens of thousands of men drowned. But each time disaster struck, Rome rebuilt its fleet, an almost superhuman demonstration of resilience. The invasion of Africa in 256 BCE, Rome decided to take the fight directly to Carthage's homeland. A massive fleet, commanded by consuls Marcus Atilius, Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso, defeated the Carthaginians at the Battle of Cape Ecnomus, one of the largest naval battles in history. With the sea lane clear, Roman forces landed in North Africa and began raiding the countryside. At first, the campaign went well. Carthage, desperate, hired mercenaries from Greece, including the Spartan general Xanthippus, who reorganized their forces. In 255 BCE, at the Battle of Tunis, Xanthippus's cavalry and war elephants crushed the Roman army. Regulus was captured, and only a handful of ships made it back to Italy. The invasion had failed, but Rome's will remained unbroken. The long grind, the war dragged on year after year, neither side able to deliver a decisive blow. Sicily became a wasteland of ruined farms and besieged cities. Carthage relied on its fleet to supply its strongholds, while Rome sought to cut off these lifelines. Naval battles like the Battle of Panamus 250 BCE and the Battle of Drepanum 249 BCE saw fortunes swing back and forth. At Drepanum, the Carthaginian admiral Odherbal scored a major victory, capturing or sinking dozens of Roman ships. Rome's persistence, however, was legendary. Even after losing fleets to storms and defeats, the Republic raised new taxes, called upon its allies, and built new ships. By 242 BCE, Rome launched yet another fleet, this time privately funded by wealthy citizens determined to end the war. The decisive Battle of the Aegates Islands in 241 BCE, the Roman fleet under Gaius Lutatius Catulus intercepted the Carthaginian supply convoy near the Aegates Islands off western Sicily. The Carthaginian ships, heavy with supplies and manned by inexperienced crews, were no match for the lighter, faster Roman vessels. The Romans closed in, boarded the enemy ships, and routed the fleet. Cut off from resupply, Carthage's garrisons in Sicily surrendered. The war was over. Under the peace treaty, Carthage ceded control of Sicily to Rome and paid a massive indemnity. For the first time, Rome held territory beyond the Italian peninsula. The victory marked the birth of Rome as a Mediterranean power. Aftermath and tensions ahead. The First Punic War had lasted 23 years, the longest continuous war in ancient history. It had cost Rome hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of lives, and unimaginable sums of money, but it had also transformed the Republic. Rome was no longer a regional land power, it was an emerging empire, with a navy to match its legions. For Carthage, the loss of Sicily was a bitter blow, but the Carthaginians were not finished. In the years to come, they would turn their attention to Spain to rebuild their wealth and military might. From there, a new leader would emerge, one whose name would be forever etched in Roman memory: Hannibal Barca. The First Punic War had ended with Rome triumphant, but neither Rome nor Carthage considered the peace final. The treaty had been forced, not embraced. Carthage, stripped of Sicily, turned its ambitions westward to Spain, a land rich in silver, fertile fields, and fierce warriors. It was there that a new champion rose, a man whose name would become Rome's greatest nightmare: Hannibal Barca, the seeds of revenge. Hannibal was born around 247 BC during the final years of the First Punic War. His father, Hamilcar Barca, was one of Carthage's most brilliant generals and a man consumed by hatred for Rome. According to legend, Hamilcar brought his young son to a sacred altar and made him swear an oath never to be a friend to Rome. This vow would define Hannibal's life. Under Hamilcar, and later his brother-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair, Carthage expanded its control in Spain, founding the city of Carthago Nova, modern Cartagena, as its capital. When Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BCE, the army acclaimed the 26-year-old Hannibal as commander. He quickly proved himself a master of both strategy and charisma, winning the loyalty of his diverse troops: Libyans, Iberians, Numidian cavalry, and mercenaries from across the Mediterranean. The spark at Saguntum, the peace treaty after the First Punic War, had set the river Ebro in Spain as the northern limit of Carthaginian expansion. South of this line lay Saguntum, a city allied to Rome. In 219 BCE, Hannibal besieged Saguntum, ignoring Roman protests. After 8 months, the city fell. Rome issued an ultimatum demanding Hannibal's surrender. When Carthage refused, war was declared. The march into history, rather than waiting for Rome to attack, Hannibal struck first and struck in a way no one expected. In the spring of 218 BCE, he assembled an army of around 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, and set out from Spain. His plan was audacious: march overland through Gaul, cross the Alps, and invade Italy itself. The journey was a feat almost beyond belief. Hannibal's army faced hostile tribes, treacherous mountain passes, snow, and starvation. By the time they emerged into the Po Valley, only about half of the original force remained. But those who survived were hardened veterans, led by a commander whose genius had already begun to reshape the war. The first blows Hannibal wasted no time. In December 218 BCE, he defeated the Romans at the Battle of the Trebia, using the icy river and a concealed force to trap the enemy. In the following spring, he crossed the Apennines and struck again, crushing a Roman army at Lake Trasimene 217 BCE. It was the largest ambush in ancient history. Over 15,000 Romans killed or captured. Rome was shaken to its core. Panic gripped the city. The Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator. Fabius adopted a new approach: avoid direct battle, harassed Hannibal's supply lines, and wear him down. This Fabian strategy frustrated many Romans but kept the Republic alive. Cannae, Rome's darkest day in 216 BCE. Rome abandoned Fabian caution and massed an army of around 80,000 men to crush Hannibal at Cannae in southern Italy. Hannibal, with perhaps half that number, executed one of the most brilliant maneuvers in military history. Placing his weakest troops in the center and his strongest on the flanks, he allowed the Roman line to push inward. As the Romans advanced, his cavalry routed theirs and closed in from behind. The result was a complete encirclement, double envelopment that annihilated the Roman army. It was a slaughter. Estimates suggest up to 50,000 Romans died in a single day, including a third of the Senate's members. Cannae became a byword for utter defeat, studied by generals for millennia. Rome's resolve after Cannae. Many of Rome's allies in southern Italy defected to Hannibal, including the wealthy city of Capua. Yet Rome refused to surrender. The Senate rejected peace overtures and raised new armies. Year after year, Roman forces harassed Hannibal, slowly reclaiming lost territory. Carthage, reluctant to send substantial reinforcements, left Hannibal to fight largely alone. The war spreads meanwhile. The conflict spread to other theaters. In Spain, Roman commanders Publius and Gnaeus Scipio campaigned to cut off Carthaginian resources. Both were killed in 211 BCE, but their legacy was carried on by Publius's young son Scipio, who would one day be known as Africanus. In Sicily, Rome crushed a pro-Carthaginian revolt in Syracuse, famously defended by the mathematician Archimedes, whose war machines delayed the siege but could not prevent the city's fall. The tide turns. By 207 BCE, Rome had regained the initiative. A Carthaginian army sent from Spain under Hasdrubal Hannibal's brother was intercepted at the Battle of the Metaurus and destroyed. Hasdrubal's head was thrown into Hannibal's camp, a grim message that no relief would come. In Spain, Scipio Africanus captured Carthago Nova in a daring assault, securing the peninsula for Rome. With Spain lost, Carthage's resources dwindled. From Italy to Africa, in 204 BCE, Scipio persuaded the Senate to let him carry the war to Africa. Landing near Carthage, he allied with Numidian prince Massinissa, whose cavalry would prove decisive. Carthage recalled Hannibal from Italy to defend the homeland. The two greatest generals of the age would meet at last. The Battle of Zama 202 BCE. Zama was a clash of titans. Hannibal's elephants charged first, but Scipio's troops opened lanes, letting the beasts pass harmlessly. Numidian cavalry routed Hannibal's horsemen, while the Roman legions engaged his infantry in a brutal contest. At the decisive moment, Scipio's cavalry returned to strike Hannibal's rear, sealing the victory. Carthage sued for peace. The terms were harsh. Carthage surrendered its fleet, paid a massive indemnity, and agreed never to wage war without Rome's consent. Hannibal, spared by the Romans, would later go into exile, hounded by Rome until his death. A changed Mediterranean. The Second Punic War had lasted 17 years. From the snows of the Alps to the sands of Zama, Rome emerged as the preeminent power in the Western Mediterranean, its confidence unshakable. Yet it had also been taught the price of underestimating an enemy. The name Hannibal would haunt Roman memory for centuries. Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal at the gates, became a proverb for imminent danger. For Carthage, the war was a mortal wound. Though still wealthy, it was politically broken and militarily crippled. But in the east, new challenges were rising, kings and empires whose ambitions would draw Rome into the wider Hellenistic world. When the Second Punic War ended in 201 BCE, Rome stood at the height of its power in the Western Mediterranean. Carthage was broken, Spain was firmly under Roman control, and the Italian allies, though weary from years of war, remained loyal. Yet across the Adriatic Sea, new opportunities and new dangers beckoned. The Eastern Mediterranean was a world of ancient kingdoms and wealthy cities, heirs to the empire of Alexander the Great. Here, kings commanded fleets, mercenary armies, and vast treasuries. Here, Rome would test not only its military might, but its diplomacy, cunning, and appetite for conquest. Shadows of Alexander. Alexander's empire had shattered upon his death in 323 BCE, dividing into rival Hellenistic kingdoms, Macedonia in the north, the Seleucid Empire sprawling from Asia Minor to Persia, and Ptolemaic Egypt ruling the Nile and the eastern Mediterranean coast. These powers often clashed, and in their rivalries Rome saw both threat and opportunity. Macedonia, under King Philip V, had quietly supported Carthage during the Second Punic War, signing an alliance with Hannibal. Though Rome had been too occupied to punish him then, the Senate did not forget. Now, with Carthage neutralized, Rome turned east. The First Macedonian War to 15 to 205 BCE. This conflict had been more a sideshow than a campaign. While Hannibal fought in Italy, Rome sent forces to aid its Greek allies, particularly the city-state of Pergamum and the Aetolian League, against Philip. The war ended in a negotiated peace, but the distrust between Rome and Macedonia deepened. The Second Macedonian War 297 BCE. In 200 BCE, Philip resumed expansion, attacking Greek cities and threatening Pergamum and road-states friendly to Rome. The Senate, under the banner of protecting Greek freedom, declared war. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Cynocephalae, 197 BCE, where Roman legions faced the famed Macedonian phalanx. The phalanx, with its wall of long spears, had once been the terror of the ancient world. But on the broken hills of Cynocephalae, it proved rigid and unwieldy. The Roman manipular formation, flexible and mobile, exploited gaps in the enemy line. Philip was defeated, forced to surrender his fleet, pay an indemnity, and abandon claims outside Macedonia. Rome announced that Greece was free at the Isthmian Games in 196 BCE, declaration that won cheers but masked a growing Roman influence over Greek affairs. The Seleucid challenge. No sooner was Macedonia humbled than another rival emerged. Antiochus III, the ambitious king of the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus saw himself as a new Alexander, expanding into Asia Minor and Greece. To Rome, this was a threat too great to ignore, especially since the exiled Hannibal had found refuge at Antiochus' escort. In 192 BCE, war broke out. The Seleucid forces, along with the Aetolian League, landed in Greece but were driven out by Rome. The decisive blow came in Asia Minor at the Battle of Magnesia, 190 BCE, where Scipio, Africanus's brother Lucius, commanded Roman legions against Antiochus. The Seleucid army, including war elephants and cataphract cavalry, was shattered. Antiochus was forced to retreat, surrender territory in Asia Minor, and pay a massive indemnity. Rome, however, did not occupy this land directly. Instead, it handed much of it to its allies Pergamum and Rhodes while retaining influence without formal annexation. This was the Roman way in the East, to control through allies and client states, avoiding the burdens of direct rule, at least for now. The Third Macedonian War 171 to 168 BCE, Philip V's son, Perseus, sought to restore Macedonian prestige, forging alliances and resisting Roman influence in Greece. His growing power alarmed the Senate, which once again declared war. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Pydna 168 BC. Here, the Macedonian phalanx initially pushed back the Roman line, but when the terrain broke their formation, The legionaries surged into the gaps, cutting down the encumbered pikemen. The slaughter was decisive. Perseus was captured. Macedonia was divided into 4 republics, and its monarchy abolished. Rome was now the unchallenged power in Greece. The destruction of Corinth, 146 BCE. Although Rome claimed to protect Greek freedom, its dominance bred resentment. In 146 BCE, the Achaean League, a federation of Greek city-states, rebelled. The Roman response was swift and brutal. At the Battle of Corinth, Roman forces crushed the rebels, sacked the city, and sold its inhabitants into slavery. Greece was placed under direct Roman administration. The end of Carthage, coincidentally, 146 BCE also marked the final destruction of Carthage in the Third Punic War. Though Carthage had abided by Rome's restrictions for decades, its economic revival stirred Roman suspicion. When a conflict with neighboring Numidia violated the treaty, Rome seized the opportunity. The siege of Carthage lasted 3 years. The city fought with desperate courage, but in 146 BCE, under Scipio Aemilianus, Roman troops stormed the walls. Carthage was burned, its population slaughtered or enslaved, and the land-cursed salt was said to have been sown into the soil, though this is likely legend. Africa became a Roman province, a new Roman world. By 146 BCE, Rome was no longer merely a Mediterranean power, it was the Mediterranean's master. Its territory stretched from Spain to Greece, from North Africa to the Alps. Its allies and client states extended its reach into Asia Minor and beyond. But with this vast expansion came new challenges. Wealth flooding into Rome fueled social inequality, political corruption, and unrest among the lower classes. The Republic had conquered the world, but in doing so, it had planted the seeds of internal crisis. Ahead lay decades of political upheaval, reform, and civil war, an age when Rome's greatest threats would come not from foreign kings, but from within its own walls. If you'd like, I can continue with Chapter 8, the Gracchi, and the seeds of civil war 133 to 121 BCE, which will mark the beginning of the Republic's slow descent into internal conflict. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Rome was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. Victories over Carthage, Macedonia, and the Seleucid Empire had filled the city with unimaginable wealth. Grain shipments from Sicily, gold and silver from Spain, and luxury goods from Greece poured into the capital. Triumphs paraded spoils and captives through the streets. Senators and generals built grand villas, adorned with Greek statues and mosaics, symbols of a republic at the height of its glory. Yet beneath the marble and gold, cracks began to spread. The very conquests that had made Rome rich were sowing seeds of unrest. The problem of land. For centuries, Roman society had been built on the small farmer soldier, the yeoman who tilled his land, raised his family, and fought in the legions when called. But decades of war had changed this balance. Many farmers had been away from their land for years, serving in distant campaigns. In their absence, estates fell into debt or were bought up by wealthy patricians and senators, who turned them into latifundia, vast estates, worked by slaves captured in Rome's wars. The result was devastating. Smallholders disappeared, replaced by landless citizens crowding into Rome in search of work. But the city offered few jobs. The slave labor that fueled the latifundia also undercut free laborers. The gap between rich and poor widened, and resentment simmered. Tiberius Gracchus, the first tribune into this crisis, stepped. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, a young nobleman from an illustrious family. His mother, Cornelia, was the daughter of Scipio Africanus, hero of the Second Punic War. Tiberius had served honorably as a military officer and had seen firsthand the suffering of dispossessed veterans. In 133 BCE, elected tribune of the plebs, Tiberius proposed a bold solution. Enforce the old law, limiting public land ownership to 500 iusura per individual, and redistribute excess land to the poor. This would restore the backbone of Rome, the small farmer, and provide land to thousands of citizens. The Senate, dominated by the wealthy elite, fiercely opposed the plan. But as tribune, Tiberius bypassed the Senate and brought the proposal directly to the People's Assembly, where it passed despite furious resistance, conflict and death. Tiberius's reforms struck at the heart of senatorial privilege. His enemies accused him of tyranny, claiming he sought to make himself king. When Tiberius ran for a second term, as tribune, a move unprecedented and viewed as dangerous, the opposition acted. On the day of the election, violence erupted in the Forum. Senators and their supporters, armed with clubs and stones, attacked Tiberius and his followers. In the chaos, Tiberius was beaten to death, along with hundreds of his supporters. His body was thrown into the Tiber without ceremony. It was the first blood spilled in the political arena of the late Republic, and it set a dangerous precedent. Political disputes could now be settled with murder. Gaius Gracchus, the visionary. 9 years later, in 123 BCE, Tiberius's younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, took up the cause. More eloquent and politically skilled than Tiberius, Gaius expanded his brother's vision. Elected tribune, he introduced a sweeping program of reforms: distribution of grain to citizens at a fixed, subsidized price, new colonies for settlement, including one on the site of destroyed Carthage, the extension of certain rights to Rome's Italian allies, judicial reforms transferring jury duty in corruption trials from senators to the equestrian class, wealthy non-senators. Gaius also pushed for massive infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, and storehouses that provided jobs for the poor, while strengthening Rome's economy. Opposition and the fall. But Gaius's growing influence alarmed the Senate. His proposal to grant full citizenship to the Italian allies was particularly unpopular among many Romans, who feared competition for land and political power. The Senate exploited these fears, backing a rival tribune to challenge him. Tensions boiled over in 121 BCE, when a violent clash between Gaius' supporters and his opponents left a senator dead. The Senate declared a senatus consultum, ultimum, a final decree granting consuls emergency powers to protect the state. Armed forces moved against Gaius, who, refusing to be captured, ordered a loyal slave to kill him. Thousands of his followers were executed without trial. The legacy of the Gracchi, the deaths of the Gracchi brothers, marked a turning point in Roman history. Their reforms had sought to address genuine social and economic problems, but their violent ends revealed the Republic's deepening fractures. Political murder had become a tool of statecraft. The precedent was set: when persuasion failed, force would decide. The social tensions they highlighted: land inequality, the plight of the urban poor, and the political disenfranchisement of Rome's Italian allies did not disappear. Instead, they would resurface in the decades to come, fueling further unrest and laying the groundwork for civil war. The storms ahead. In the years following the Gracchi, Rome's politics grew more volatile. Ambitious generals began to see that loyalty from the masses or from a personal army could be more powerful than the Senate's approval. Foreign wars would bring new heroes to the stage. Men like Gaius, Marius, and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, whose rivalry would plunge the Republic into chaos. The Republic had weathered the storms of Hannibal and Macedon, but now it faced a more insidious threat: the corrosion of its own political traditions. The Roman state, that had once prided itself on its unity and discipline, was beginning to tear itself apart from within. The deaths of the Gracchi brothers had left Rome scarred. Their vision of reform had been crushed. But the problems they sought to solve, land inequality, the plight of veterans, and the political exclusion of Italy's allies, remained unresolved. Into this turbulent world stepped two men whose ambitions and rivalries would transform the Republic: Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Together, they would reshape Rome's armies, ignite its first true civil wars, and set the Republic on an irreversible path toward dictatorship. The rise of Gaius Marius. Gaius Marius was not born into Rome's elite. A novus homo, a new man with no senatorial ancestors, he hailed from the small town of Arpinum. His military skill and political ambition propelled him upward, and by 107 BCE, he was elected consul. Rome at the time faced a desperate crisis in North Africa. The Numidian king Jugurtha had waged a long and corrupting war against Rome, bribing senators and generals to avoid defeat. Marius promised to end the war swiftly, appealing directly to the Roman people over the Senate's objections. He recruited volunteers from the Capite Censi, landless citizens, previously excluded from military service, offering them pay, equipment, and the promise of land after service. This decision would change Roman history. Soldiers were no longer tied to the state through property and tradition. They were tied to their generals through personal loyalty. The legions began to shift from instruments of the Republic to the private armies of ambitious commanders. The Marian reforms. Marius's military innovations went beyond recruitment. He reorganized the legions into standardized units, equipped all soldiers with the same weapons and armor, and introduced the pilum, a heavy javelin designed to bend on impact, preventing enemies from throwing it back. He emphasized discipline, forced marches, and self-sufficiency, earning his men the nickname Marius's mules for carrying their own gear. These reforms made Rome's armies more professional, more deadly and more dangerous to the Republic's stability. Victory over Jugurtha, Marius's campaign in Numidia, was ultimately brought to a close not by his own hand, but by his subordinate, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, patrician with a sharp mind and an even sharper ambition. Sulla negotiated Jugurtha's surrender through a combination of diplomacy and treachery. Jugurtha was brought in chains to Rome, where he was paraded in Marius's triumph before being executed. Though Marius received the glory, Sulla never forgot that it was his cunning that ended the war. The seeds of rivalry were planted. The threat from the north no sooner was Jugurtha defeated than a new menace appeared. The migrating tribes of the Cimbri and Teutones, who had already destroyed several Roman armies in Gaul. In a series of campaigns between 104 and 101 BCE, Marius, re-elected consul an unprecedented 5 consecutive times, crushed the invaders at the battles of Aquisextiae and Versiliae, saving Italy from invasion and cementing his status as Rome's foremost general. Marius returned to Rome as a hero, but also as a man accustomed to extraordinary political power. His dominance, however, would soon be challenged. The Social War 9188 BCE. While Rome expanded abroad, tension simmered at home. The Italian allies Socii had fought alongside Rome for centuries, but they lacked Roman citizenship. They paid taxes, served in the legions, and died in Rome's wars, yet they had no political voice. Their demand for citizenship was repeatedly blocked by the Senate. In 91 BCE, the assassination of the reformist tribune Marcus Livius Drusus ignited the Social War, a brutal conflict in which Rome's Italian allies rose in revolt. Marius, Sulla, and other commanders fought to suppress the rebellion, which spread across central and southern Italy. The war ended in 88 BCE, with Rome granting citizenship to all Italians, who laid down their arms of victory for the allies, though at terrible cost in blood. The Mithridatic War and Sulla's first march on Rome. Even as the Social War raged, trouble flared in the east. Mithridates VI, the ambitious king of Pontus, launched a massacre of tens of thousands of Romans and Italians in Asia Minor, sparking the First Mithridatic War. The Senate appointed Sulla to lead the campaign, but the People's Assembly, manipulated by Marius, transferred the command to Marius instead. For Sulla, this was intolerable. Breaking every tradition of the Republic, he marched his legions on Rome itself in 88 BC, the first time a Roman general had used his army to seize the capital. Marius fled, and Sulla restored himself as commander before departing for the east. Marius's return and the bloodshed in Rome, while Sulla campaigned against Mithridates. Marius returned from exile, rallying his supporters and seizing control of Rome in 87 BC. What followed was a bloody purge of Sulla's allies. Senators and equestrians were executed without trial, their property confiscated. Marius, now consul for the 7th time, died only a few weeks into his term, leaving his faction in control under Lucius Cornelius Cinna. Sulla's second march and the proscriptions after defeating Mithridates in the east. Sulla returned to Italy in 83 BCE with a veteran army. Over 2 years of civil war, he crushed the Marian forces, culminating in the Battle of the Colline Gate, 82 BCE. Once in power, Sulla had himself appointed dictator not for a fixed term, but to reform the Republic. His reforms strengthened the Senate's authority, curtailed the power of the tribunes, and reorganized the courts. But his most infamous act was the proscriptions, lists of enemies of the state whose lives and property were forfeit. Wealthy Romans were murdered, their estates seized, and their families ruined. It was political terror on an unprecedented scale. Sulla's resignation and death in 79 BCE, astonishingly. Sulla resigned the dictatorship and retired to his villa in Campania, claiming he had restored the Republic. He died the following year, leaving behind a Rome more fractured and bloodstained than he had found it. The legacy of Marius and Sulla, the rivalry between Marius and Sulla, had shattered the old norms of the Republic. Armies had become tools for personal ambition. Political violence had reached new heights, and the precedent of marching on Rome had been set. Future generalsmen like Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar would remember these lessons well. Rome had survived the Social War, the Mithridatic threat, and 2 civil wars, but the Republic's soul had been altered. The question was no longer whether another general would seize power, but when, and who. When Sulla died in 78 BCE, Rome was left without a dominant leader for the first time in years. The Senate, strengthened by Sulla's reforms, hoped to restore the old order, but the reality was far different. The power vacuum was quickly filled by ambitious generalsmen who had learned from Marius and Sulla that in the late Republic, armies and personal influence often mattered more than laws and tradition. Chief among them were Gnaeus Pompeius, Magnus Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus. In their shadow, a younger and far more dangerous figure began his ascent: Gaius Julius Caesar. Pompey, the young prodigy. Pompey was only 23 when Sulla entrusted him with command during the civil wars, a staggering honor for one so young. Tall, handsome, and charismatic, he won early victories in Sicily and Africa, earning the title Magnus the Great from his troops. He was no ordinary general. His career defied precedent. The Senate bent its own rules repeatedly to accommodate his rise. In 77 BCE, he crushed a rebellion in Spain led by the Marian general Quintus Sertorius, a brilliant commander, whose guerrilla tactics tied down Roman forces for years. Although Sertorius was eventually assassinated by his own officers, Pompey claimed the credit for ending the war, further bolstering his reputation. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. If Pompey was Rome's golden boy, Crassus was its banker. Having amassed a vast fortune through real estate speculation, often buying properties cheaply, during Sulla's proscriptions, Crassus used his wealth to build political influence. He was a skilled general as well, though his greatest opportunity came in 73 BCE, when Rome faced a crisis from within. The Spartacus Revolt. 7371 BCE, a Thracian gladiator named Spartacus led a rebellion of slaves that swelled to tens of thousands. They defeated multiple Roman armies, rampaging across Italy for 2 years. Crassus was given command and imposed brutal discipline, famously executing 1 in 10 of his own men. Decimation. To restore order, he finally crushed the revolt in 71 BCE, killing Spartacus in battle and crucifying 6,000 prisoners along the Appian Way. Pompey, returning from Spain, intercepted a fleeing remnant of the rebels and claimed partial credit for ending the war, much to Crassus's irritation. The rivalry between the two men deepened, though necessity would soon force them into uneasy cooperation. The consulship of Pompey and Crassus. 70 BCE. Both men leveraged their military fame to secure election as consuls in 70 BCE. Despite Pompey's lack of senatorial experience, together they rolled back parts of Sulla's constitution, restoring power to the tribunes and reforming the courts. This alliance of convenience masked deep mistrust, but it set the stage for the next generation of political maneuvering. Pompey's eastern conquests. In 67 BCE, the Senate granted Pompey extraordinary command to eradicate Mediterranean piracy, which had disrupted Rome's grain supply. With sweeping powers, he cleared the seas in just 3 months, a feat that stunned his contemporaries. The following year, he was given command in the east against King Mithridates VI of Pontus, Rome's old adversary. Pompey not only defeated Mithridates, but also reorganized the entire eastern Mediterranean. He annexed Syria, made Judea a client kingdom, and brought immense wealth to Rome. By the time he returned in 62 BCE, he was the most celebrated man in the Republic. The rise of Julius Caesar. While Pompey and Crassus dominated the military stage, another figure was quietly building his reputation. Born into an ancient but politically diminished patrician family, Gaius Julius Caesar combined charm, eloquence, and relentless ambition. He cultivated popular support by aligning with the populace, the political faction favoring the common people, and by hosting lavish games and public spectacles. Caesar's early career was marked by calculated risks. Captured by pirates in 75 BCE, he joked that they should raise his ransom because he was worth more. Then, after being freed, hunted them down and had them crucified. As aedile in 65 BCE, he spent enormous sums on public entertainments, winning the affection of the masses but plunging himself into debt. His political skill and daring earned him the position of Pontifex Maximus, chief priest, in 63 BCE, despite fierce opposition. The Catiline Conspiracy. 63 BCE. That same year, Rome faced the Catiline Conspiracy, a plot by the aristocrat Lucius Sergius Catilina to overthrow the government. The consul Marcus Tullius Cicero exposed the conspiracy, delivering speeches that became legendary examples of Roman oratory. Caesar, though suspected of sympathizing with Catiline's followers, avoided direct association, maintaining his rising popularity. Pompey's return and political deadlock. When Pompey returned from the east in 62 BCE, he expected the Senate to ratify his settlements and grant land to his veterans. Instead, the Senate, fearing his power, stalled. Crassus, still resentful, saw an opportunity to ally with Pompey's enemies. The political deadlock left Pompey searching for a new partner, someone who could bridge the gap between him and the populares. The first triumvirate, 60 BCE. That partner was Julius Caesar. In 60 BCE, Caesar brokered an informal alliance between himself, Pompey, and Crassus. Each had something to gain. Pompey wanted land for his veterans and recognition of his eastern settlements. Crassus wanted financial policies favorable to his tax-collecting allies. Caesar wanted the consulship and a lucrative provincial command. This first triumvirate was not a legal body, but a pact of mutual benefit, sealed by marriage. Pompey wed Caesar's daughter Julia. Together, they dominated Roman politics, sidelining the Senate and reshaping the Republic's power structure. In 59 BCE, Caesar, as consul, pushed through their agendas, often defying tradition and using the assembly of the people to bypass senatorial opposition. At the year's end, he secured command in Gaul for 5 years, a decision that would change Rome forever. The stage is set by 60 BCE. The Republic was effectively under the control of 3 men. Yet beneath the surface, the alliance was fragile. Pompey and Crassus remained rivals, their cooperation dependent on Caesar's mediation. Caesar, in turn, was about to embark on campaigns in Gaul that would give him unprecedented military power. The balance of power in Rome was shifting. The question was no longer whether the Republic could survive, but which of its ambitious generals would be the one to claim supreme authority. In 58 BCE, Gaius Julius Caesar left Rome to take command of Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, Illyricum, the Adriatic coast, and Transalpine Gaul, southern France. On paper, this was a standard provincial command. In reality, it was the perfect stage for Caesar's ambition. His mission: defend Rome's northern frontier. His real aim: build an army, a fortune, and a reputation so vast that no one in the Republic could challenge him. The Helvetii migration. Caesar's opportunity came almost immediately. The Helvetii, a Celtic tribe from modern Switzerland, sought to migrate westward, threatening Roman territory and allies. Caesar blocked their path and, at the Battle of Bibracte, decisively defeated them. Instead of annihilating the survivors, he forced them to return to their lands, earning the gratitude of Rome's Gallic allies, while projecting himself as both a conqueror and a protector. The Germanic threat. Next came the Germanic king, Augustus, who had crossed the Rhine with his warriors, terrorizing Gaul. Caesar, portraying himself as the defender of Gallic freedom, marched north. In a brutal battle, his legions crushed the Germans, driving them back across the Rhine. This victory sent a clear message: Rome would not tolerate foreign powers west of the river. The Belgae campaign. In 57 BCE, Caesar turned his attention to the Belgae, a fierce confederation of tribes in northern Gaul. The campaign was swift and ruthless. After a series of sieges and field battles, the Belgae were subdued, though not without fierce resistance. Caesar's Commentary de Bello Gallico described them as the bravest of all the Gauls, a compliment that doubled as propaganda to magnify his own victories. The Veneti and the first Roman fleet in Gaul. In 56 BCE, rebellion flared along the Atlantic coast among the Veneti, skilled seafarers who challenged Rome's authority. Caesar ordered the construction of a fleet unusual for a land general, adapting his tactics to naval combat. The Romans lured the Veneti into battle, disabled their ships by cutting rigging with sickles on poles, and forced their surrender. The Veneti leaders were executed, their people sold into slavery. Caesar's way of warning other tribes. Crossing the Rhine and invading Britain. By 55 BCE, Caesar's ambitions had grown bolder. To intimidate the Germans and demonstrate Rome's reach, he built a massive wooden bridge across the Rhine in just 10 days. Engineering marvel, and led his legions briefly into German territory before withdrawing. Later that year, and again in 54 BCE, he launched expeditions across the English Channel into Britain. Though the campaigns were limited in scope, They marked the first Roman incursions into the island, adding to Caesar's prestige. The Gallic Revolt and the rise of Vercingetorix in 54 BCE. Political troubles in Rome. Tensions in the First Triumvirate drew Caesar's attention, but in Gaul, unrest simmered. In 52 BCE, a charismatic Arvernian chieftain named Vercingetorix united many tribes in a massive rebellion. He adopted a scorched earth strategy, denying Caesar's legions food and forcing them into grueling winter campaigns. The rebellion climaxed at the Battle of Alesia. Caesar besieged the hilltop fortress, with double walls, one facing inward to trap the defenders, another facing outward to repel relief forces. Outnumbered and nearly surrounded himself, Caesar's army held firm. In a final assault, the Romans broke the relief army, and Vercingetorix surrendered, throwing down his weapons at Caesar's feet in an iconic moment of ancient history. The aftermath, the victory at Alesia, effectively ended large-scale resistance in Gaul. Over the next 2 years, Caesar mopped up remaining rebels, securing the province from the Atlantic to the Rhine. His campaigns had brought immense wealth to Rome, much of it flowing into Caesar's own coffers. More importantly, he had forged an army of hardened veterans whose loyalty was to him personally, not to the Senate. The political storm in Rome while Caesar was winning glory in Gaul. The first triumvirate was unraveling. Julia, Pompey's wife, and Caesar's daughter, died in childbirth in 54 BCE, severing a vital bond between the two men. In 53 BCE, Crassus was killed in the disastrous Battle of Carrhae against the Parthians. With Crassus gone, Pompey and Caesar stood as rivals, each with immense military power and political influence. In Rome, the Senate, led by Pompey's allies, grew increasingly wary of Caesar's rising power. They demanded that he disband his army before returning to the city. Caesar, knowing that without his legions he would face prosecution and political ruin, refused. The crossing of the Rubicon by 50 BCE, the confrontation was inevitable. The Senate ordered Caesar to relinquish his command. Instead, in January 49 BCE, he led his legion across the Rubicon River, the boundary between his province and Italy, utterly violating Roman law. According to tradition, he declared, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. The civil war that followed would decide not only the fate of Caesar and Pompey, but the future of the Roman Republic itself. The winter air was sharp when Caesar stood at the banks of the Rubicon in January 49 BCE. Behind him lay Gaul, the province where he had forged his power. Ahead, Italy, and the capital he sought to control. Roman law was clear: no general could cross into Italy with an army without the Senate's permission. To do so was to declare war on the Republic. But the Senate, dominated by Pompey's faction, had stripped him of command and demanded he return as a private citizen, vulnerable to trial and ruin. Caesar chose defiance. He stepped forward, his officers close behind, and uttered the words that would echo through history: "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. The flight of the Senate and Pompey. As Caesar marched swiftly south with a single legion, panic gripped Rome. Pompey, entrusted by the Senate with defending the Republic, realized he had neither the time nor the troops to face Caesar in Italy. Many senators and allies fled with him to Brundisium, planning to regroup in Greece, where they could draw upon Rome's eastern provinces. Caesar entered Rome without a battle, seizing the state treasury and securing political legitimacy through rapid appointments. But Caesar knew the war could not be won without confronting Pompey directly. The campaign in Spain, rather than pursue Pompey immediately across the Adriatic, Caesar moved west to neutralize his opponent's forces in Spain. "I go," he reportedly said, "to fight an army without a general. Later I will fight a general without an army." In a lightning campaign, he forced the surrender of Pompey's legions at Ilerda in 49 BCE, securing the west before turning to the main theatre. The road to Pharsalus in early 48 BCE. Caesar crossed into Greece with a smaller force than Pompey, whose army outnumbered his nearly 2-to-1. Pompey avoided direct battle, hoping to starve Caesar into submission. Caesar's situation became desperate at Dyrrhachium, where a failed siege nearly destroyed his army. But Pompey, cautious, did not press the advantage. The two armies finally met in the plains of Pharsalus in central Greece on August 9, 48 BCE. Pompey's troops, well-fed and disciplined, expected to overwhelm Caesar's weary veterans. Caesar, however, relied on his men's experience. He ordered a hidden reserve of infantry to counter Pompey's superior cavalry, turning the tide of the battle. When the dust cleared, Pompey's forces were shattered. Pompey's death in Egypt. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge with the young king Ptolemy XIII. But Ptolemy's advisors, eager to win Caesar's favor, betrayed their guest. As Pompey stepped ashore, he was murdered by former Roman officers. His head presented to Caesar. Far from pleased, Caesar is said to have wept at the sight, mourning the loss of his one-time ally and son-in-law, the Alexandrian War, and Cleopatra. Caesar, now in Alexandria, was drawn into Egypt's dynastic struggle between Ptolemy XIII and his sister wife Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra, smuggled into Caesar's presence, rolled inside a carpet or linen sack, according to some sources, captivated him with her intelligence and charm. Caesar threw his support behind her, igniting the Alexandrian War. Street battles and palace intrigue culminated in the death of Ptolemy XIII. Drowned in the Nile while fleeing, Cleopatra was restored to the throne as Rome's ally, and her political and personal relationship with Caesar began a union that would produce a son, Ptolemy XV Philometor. Caesar, known to history as Caesarion. The Eastern campaigns. Before returning to Rome, Caesar marched into Asia Minor to confront Pharnax II, the son of Mithridates VI, who had taken advantage of the civil war to seize territory. Caesar crushed him at the Battle of Zela in 47 BCE, sending his famous dispatch to the Senate, Vidi, Vici I came, I saw, I conquered. The African War. Back in Rome, Caesar was appointed dictator, but still faced resistance from Pompey's remaining supporters. Now gathered in North Africa under Cato the Younger and Metellus Scipio in 46 BCE, Caesar crossed into Africa and won a decisive victory at Thapsus, after which Cato, refusing to live under Caesar's rule, committed suicide in Utica. His stoic death became a symbol of republican virtue. The final battle at Munda. The war's last flames burned in Spain, where Pompey's sons, Gnaeus and Sextus, rallied an army. In 45 BCE, Caesar met them at Munda in a fierce battle under the Spanish sun. The fighting was brutal. Caesar himself took up arms in the front lines to inspire his men. When victory finally came, it was total. Gnaeus was killed, Sextus fled, and the civil war was over. Caesar's return as master of Rome. When Caesar returned to Rome in triumph, he was more than a victorious general. He was the unchallenged ruler of the Republic. The Senate named him dictator, perpetua dictator for life. His face appeared on coins, his statues rose across the city, and his plans for reform began in earnest. But beneath the celebrations, whispers of tyranny grew louder. Senators who had once bowed to him now began to conspire. The Republic had survived Marius, Sulla, and Pompey, but, in Caesar's hands, it was no longer the same Republic at all. What came next would be its final crisis. Rome in early 44 BCE was a city draped in triumph. The civil wars were over, the legions victorious, and the Mediterranean world firmly under Roman control. Julius Caesar, now dictator, perpetuo dictator for life, had become the most powerful man the Republic had ever known. His face adorned coins, his statues lined the streets, and his name was synonymous with victory. For the masses, he was a hero who had given them land, grain, and spectacle. For many senators, he was something far more dangerous, a king in all but name. The shadow of kingship. Romans had a deep, almost sacred hatred for monarchy, tracing back to the expulsion of their last king, Tarquinius Superbus, nearly 5 centuries earlier. Too many in the Senate. Caesar's accumulation of honors and titles, his golden chair in the Senate, his laurel crown worn in public, his right to speak first in debate, felt like a slow march toward tyranny. Rumors swirled that he intended to crown himself king, perhaps in preparation for a campaign against Parthia. A public incident fanned these fears. During the Lupercalia festival in February 44 BCE, Mark Antony offered Caesar a diadem, a symbol of kingship, in front of a cheering crowd. Caesar refused, but the episode left a bitter taste. For the conspirators watching from the Senate, it was proof enough that the Republic was slipping away. The conspiracy forms. Among those who began to plot Caesar's death were some of his closest allies, men who had fought beside him in the Civil War. Chief among them was Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar treated almost like a son, and Gaius Cassius Longinus, a seasoned commander. They called themselves liberators. The liberators, claiming they would restore the Republic's freedom by striking down the tyrant. Over weeks of secret meetings, the conspiracy grew to include over 60 senators. Their plan was simple but bold: kill Caesar in a public place, where their act would seem not a murder born of ambition, but a noble sacrifice for Rome. The Ides of March. The chosen day was March 15, 44 BC, either Ides of March. On the morning of that day, omens abounded. A soothsayer had warned Caesar to beware the Ides of March. His wife, Calpurnia, dreamed of his murder and begged him to stay home. For a moment, Caesar wavered, but Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, arrived to escort him, assuring him the Senate awaited to grant him more honors. Caesar relented. He set out for the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting that day. This was itself symbolic. Pompey's theater, built by his former ally turned rival, was now the stage for the final act, the assassination. As Caesar entered the Senate chamber, the conspirators closed in under the pretense of presenting petitions. Tullius Cimber approached, asking for the recall of his exiled brother. When Caesar refused, Cimber grabbed his toga, pulling it from his shoulders as signal to strike. Casca struck first, grazing Caesar's neck. The dictator rose, trying to fend off his attackers, but the blades kept coming. In the chaos, he saw Brutus among them. According to later accounts, perhaps more legend than fact, Caesar uttered the famous words, "Et tu, Brute, you too, Brutus." In that moment, resistance left him. He pulled his toga over his head and collapsed at the foot of Pompey's statue, stabbed 23 times. The immediate aftermath, when the deed was done, the assassins stood before the stunned Senate, shouting that Rome was free. But instead of cheers, there was silence. Outside, the city boiled with confusion. The common people, far from celebrating, mourned the man who had brought them stability after years of war. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal ally, seized the initiative. He delivered a funeral oration so fiery that it turned the crowd against the conspirators, who were forced to flee Rome. The power vacuum. In theory, Caesar's death was meant to restore the Republic. In practice, it unleashed chaos. His will left generous gifts to the Roman people and named his grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, later known as Augustus, as his primary heir. Antony, Octavian, and Marcus Lepidus soon formed the second triumvirate to avenge Caesar, leading to another round of proscriptions and civil wars. The legacy of the Ides of March. The assassination of Julius Caesar did not save the Republic, it destroyed the last chance it had to survive in its old form. The liberators underestimated both the loyalty Caesar commanded among the people and the ambitions of the men who would replace him. Within 2 decades, Rome would no longer be a republic at all, but an empire ruled by a single man. In the centuries to come, the Ides of March would stand as a warning that the killing of a leader may end a life, but it cannot kill an idea, especially when that idea has already taken root in the hearts of the people. The air in Rome after the Ides of March was heavy with tension. Julius Caesar lay dead, but his shadow still dominated the city. The conspirators, calling themselves liberators, expected to be hailed as saviors of the Republic. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by silence and uncertainty. The people did not rejoice at Caesar's death, they mourned. They remembered not a would-be tyrant, but the man who had given them land, bread, and victory after decades of civil war. The struggle for Caesar's legacy. In the days after the assassination, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant and co-consul, took control of events. He negotiated a fragile compromise. Caesar's reforms would remain in place, and the assassins would be pardoned. But Antony's real advantage lay in Caesar's will, which he soon made public. It revealed 2 shocking points: generosity to the people. Each Roman citizen would receive a cash gift from Caesar's personal fortune. An heir. Caesar had adopted his grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, making the young man just 18 years old his legal son and principal heir. Octavius was away in Illyricum when he learned of his adoption. Few in Rome took him seriously at first, but the young man quickly proved he had inherited Caesar's ambition as well as his name. Octavian arrives. Octavius returned to Italy, now calling himself Gaius Julius Caesar. He played his cards carefully, presenting himself as the loyal son of the murdered dictator, determined to honor his memory, but also as a champion of the Republic's laws. His ability to charm the Senate and win over Caesar's veterans allowed him to begin building his own power base. Antony underestimated him, seeing only an inexperienced youth. But Octavian was quietly assembling both political influence and military force. The stage was set for a collision between Caesar's heir and his former right-hand man. The Second Triumvirate, by 43 BCE, open conflict between Antony and the Senate had erupted, with Octavian siding temporarily with the Senate's forces. However, both sides soon realized they needed each other, especially to deal with the liberators, who had fled to the eastern provinces. In November 43 BCE, Antony, Octavian, and Marcus Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate, a legally recognized alliance with almost dictatorial powers for 5 years. Their first act was brutal. They drew up lists of enemies' prescriptions, whose wealth would be confiscated and whose lives were forfeit. Among the victims was the orator Cicero, who had spoken fiercely against Antony. His head and hands were displayed in the forum as a grim warning. The Battle of Philippi. With Rome purged of opposition, the triumvirs turned east to face Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of the conspiracy against Caesar. In 42 BCE, the two sides met in Macedonia at the Battle of Philippi. The fighting was fierce and costly. Cassius, believing the battle lost, committed suicide. Brutus held out longer, but was defeated in a second engagement and took his own life. The cause of the Republic died with them. After Philippi, the Roman world was divided. Antony took the eastern provinces, Octavian the west, and Lepidus Africa. But this division was only temporary. Rivalry was inevitable. Antony and Cleopatra in the east. Antony sought both wealth and alliances. In Egypt, he met Cleopatra VII, the brilliant and charismatic queen who had once been Caesar's lover. Their political and romantic partnership became the stuff of legend. Together, they envisioned a Mediterranean dominated by their combined power. To Octavian, however, Antony's alliance with Cleopatra was a gift. He began portraying Antony as a man who had betrayed Rome, seduced by an Eastern queen, and plotting to make Alexandria the center of power. Antony's gifts of Roman territory to Cleopatra's children fueled this narrative. Octavian consolidates power in the west. Octavian faced unrest from veterans demanding land, and from Sextus Pompey, the last surviving son of Pompey the Great, who controlled Sicily and threatened Rome's grain supply. Through a combination of military campaigns and political deals, Octavian eliminated these threats. Lepidus was sidelined and forced into retirement, leaving the Roman world divided between just two men, Octavian in the west, Antony in the east. The road to Actium. By 32 BCE, the fragile alliance had collapsed. Octavian obtained a copy of Antony's will and read it to the Senate, inflaming opinion against him. The will allegedly confirmed Antony's desire to be buried in Alexandria beside Cleopatra, an unthinkable betrayal to Roman pride. The Senate declared war, not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra, framing the conflict as a defense of Rome against foreign influence. This allowed Octavian to present himself as the champion of Roman tradition. The Battle of Actium 31 BCE. The decisive clash came on September 2, 31 BCE. Off the coast of western Greece, Antony and Cleopatra's fleet faced Octavian's, commanded by his brilliant admiral Marcus Agrippa. The battle turned when Cleopatra's flagship broke through the fighting and fled. Antony followed, leaving his fleet leaderless. The remainder was destroyed or captured. The end of Antony and Cleopatra defeated. Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt. As Octavian's forces closed in, both chose suicide over capture. Antony fell on his sword. Cleopatra, according to tradition, used the bite of an asp. Their deaths marked the end of Ptolemaic Egypt, which became a Roman province. Octavian becomes Augustus in 29 BCE. Octavian returned to Rome in triumph. 3 years later, in 27 BCE, he offered to restore the Republic's powers to the Senate, but the Senate instead granted him unprecedented authority over the provinces and armies. He took the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, marking the birth of the Roman Empire. Augustus presented himself not as a king, but as the princeps, the first citizen. Yet behind this modest title lay absolute power. The Republic was gone. In its place stood an imperial system that would endure for centuries. In 27 BCE, Rome stood at the dawn of a new era. The civil wars that had torn the Republic apart were over. The Senate, exhausted by decades of political bloodshed, formally entrusted supreme power to Gaius Octavius, now Augustus, the revered one. The title sounded ceremonial, but in truth it marked the birth of a system in which a single man held ultimate authority over Rome's armies, provinces, and destiny. The Republic was dead in all but name. The Roman Empire had begun. The illusion of the Republic. Augustus understood the deep Roman suspicion of monarchy. Unlike Julius Caesar, he avoided crowns, diadems, and overt displays of royal power. Instead, he wrapped his rule in the trappings of republican tradition. He took the modest title Princeps First Citizen, and presented himself as the restorer of order, not its destroyer. Officially, the Senate governed. In practice, Augustus controlled every key decision. In the first settlement of 27 BCE, he surrendered extraordinary powers back to the Senate, only for the Senate to grant him control over the empire's most crucial provinces, those with the bulk of the legions. This gift ensured his hold over the army, the real foundation of imperial power. Reforms at home. Augustus knew that stability required more than military dominance. It required social and economic renewal after decades of chaos. Administrative reforms. He created a permanent civil service, standardized taxation, and established a postal system linking the empire. Urban renewal. Augustus famously claimed he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Temples were restored, aqueducts repaired, and new public buildings like the Forum of Augustus erected. Moral legislation. Concerned about declining traditional values, he passed laws encouraging marriage and childbirth among the elite, while penalizing adultery and moral laxity. The army of the empire. Augustus transformed Rome's military into a professional standing force. Soldiers served fixed terms, typically 20 years, and received pensions upon retirement. Funded by a new military treasury, he established the Praetorian Guard, an elite unit stationed in Rome to protect the emperor, though in time it would become a dangerous political force. The Pax Romana. Under Augustus, the Roman world entered an age of relative peace and prosperity, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. From Britain to Egypt, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, trade flourished along secure roads and sea lanes. Cities grew rich, cultures blended, and Roman law brought a measure of order to lands that had once been battlefields. Foreign policy and expansion. Augustus was cautious in foreign affairs, preferring diplomacy and client kings to reckless conquest. Still, Rome's borders expanded. In the west, the empire absorbed much of Spain and secured the Alpine passes. In the east, client states like Judea and Armenia acted as buffers against Parthia. In the north, Roman legions pushed into Germania until disaster struck. The Teutoburg disaster 09 CE. In one of Rome's worst defeats, 3 legions under Publius Quinctilius Verus were ambushed and annihilated by Germanic tribes, led by Arminius, in the Teutoburg forest. The loss shocked Rome and ended Augustus's ambitions for full conquest of Germania. The Rhine became the empire's permanent frontier in the north. Patron of the arts, Augustus understood the power of culture in shaping public opinion. He surrounded himself with poets like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid, whose works celebrated Rome's destiny and the emperor's role as its guiding star. Virgil's Aeneid linked Augustus's lineage to the Trojan hero Aeneas, casting the emperor as the fulfillment of Rome's divine mission. Succession and the end of an era. The greatest challenge Augustus faced was securing an orderly succession. He had no surviving sons, and his carefully groomed heirs Marcellus, Agrippa, and Gaius, and Lucius Caesar died before him. Eventually, he adopted Tiberius, his stepson, as his successor. In 14 CE, after more than 40 years as Rome's ruler, Augustus died at the age of 75. His final words to the Roman people were a mix of humility and theatricality. "I found Rome a city of brick. I leave it a city of marble. Have I played my part well? Applaud as I exit." The Senate declared him a god. Javus Augustus and his reign became the model for centuries of emperors to come. Legacy. Augustus's reign transformed Rome from a fractured republic into a stable autocracy, cloaked in republican forms. He brought peace to a war-weary empire, reformed its institutions, and set its borders on a secure foundation. Yet his system also concentrated power in one man's hands, ensuring that the fate of the empire would rise or fall with the quality of its ruler. The republic was gone forever. In its place stood the Roman Empire, an empire that, under Augustus's successors, would reach heights of glory and depths of corruption, but would never again return to the world of citizen assemblies and consular elections that had birthed it.